Okay, welcome back to part 2 of our look at nationalism. When we last left off, or we'll kind of go back, we talked about the definition. We talked about the definition of nationalism. We said the definition of nationalism was extreme pride in your nation to the point that you looked down upon other nations. And then we wanted to look up talked about the nationalism movements that occurred in both Italy and Germany, the unification of Italy that comes about as Italy attempts to overthrow rule from Austria, the Habsburg, and France. And we left with the United Italy, and that they did have some problems after that, and then they worked to try to build an empire, and that was having a kind of a rough setup. And then we started talking about the unification of the Germanic lands, and that there was an effort of Germany to make that happen. And when we last talked, we were talking about Otto von Bismarck. Every time I say von Bismarck, who was the prime minister to Prussia, and his efforts to get rid of Austria within Prussia. Prussia had used Austria they had worked together, and then they decided they didn't want to be with them anymore, or they really actually never wanted Austria in there in the first place. So the last slide that we did was the one that you see right here, which hopefully is going to work in a minute. Maybe it's not going to. There we go. Okay. So we said that Bismarck could not increase Prussia's power as long as Austria is in the way, and so they needed to get rid of Austria. So it's going to take this war and then another one to actually unify Germany into the one country that we know it today. And they wanted to unify because they realized that the German city-states had a ton of stuff in common, and it was kind of beneficial to them to be unified and promote this unified Germany and work as one rather than working as competing city-states. The similar reason that you saw in Italy itself. So Bismarck's working behind the scenes because remember, he's just the prime minister to one of the German city-states, that being Prussia, although it's by far definitely, you could argue, a very powerful of the German city-states. And so they had promised Venetia to Italy in exchange for their support. And so this is the German unification movement and the Italian unification movement are actually going on at one point at kind of the similar times. And he also persuaded Napoleon III to keep France neutral. So Bismarck sent Prussian troops into the Austrian state of Holstein, which is where Austria had, and previously Austria and Prussia had worked to take these two smaller areas, and then they divided them up amongst each other. And Austria is like, Prussia, you shouldn't be in our areas. That's provocation, and so that's an act of war. And so Austria declares war on Prussia because Prussia invaded a portion of Austria, which is Holstein. So the Holstein issue got all of Prussia on board for the war, and then in an address to the Prussian people, King Wilhelm, very good, blames Austria for starting the war. He's like, Austria started it in the first place. They're the ones that caused problem. You want to remember this tactic of who's blamed for war, particularly who the people of a nation are told start a war, because that will come up again later on. And this appeals to people's sense of nationalism. How dare the Austrians attack us? Who do they think they are? Who don't they know that we're Prussians? Why are they attacking Prussia? We don't like that. And people want to go and defend Prussia. So the war unfolds exactly as Bismarck had pretty much planned it to happen in the end. Prussia beats the Austrians in 7 weeks. They sign the Austro-Prussian treaty, and it ends the Austro-Prussian War. It dissolves the German Confederation. Austria has to give up Holstein. It now belongs to Germany. And there's still issues there. You have several northern German states unite with Prussia. And Prussia there are only 3 states left of the former Germanic lands that are not connected to Prussia. So all of the Germanic lands are not yet unified. Most of them are. And while this is seen, the Austro-Prussian War is seen as the first step in real total German unification, everything's not entirely done yet. So they want to bring in those southern German states that are not part of what's called the new German Confederation. And that confederation is really, this is me trying to write Prussia, is really controlled by Prussia. Well, that's, you get, it's supposed to be Prussia. So in 1870, there's conflict going with France and about this place called the Alsace-Lorraine. It's a territory that's going to come up several times in history, and it's always the same thing about who really owns the Alsace and Lorraine. The provinces had been a part of the Holy Roman Empire, and that included Prussia. And the issue begins to spark nationalist feelings within the southern German states, because these are the areas close to where the Alsace-Lorraine is. It's on this border between what is now known as the German states and France, and they argue about this a lot. And so the southern states support Prussia, and Prussia's at war with France because they feel very nationalistic. They don't like France trying to take over this Alsace-Lorraine territory. And eventually, in 1871, Bismarck wins the Franco-Prussian War. So we have the war between Austria and Prussia that has to, in the effort to get Holstein back. There's the war between France and Prussia in order to deal with the Alsace-Lorraine. And the ultimate thing that comes out of these two wars is the total unification of Germany. What's prompting these? The concept of nationalism. So this map is one you want to look at a lot. The dark green is the Kingdom of Prussia in 1865. The light green are all the areas in the German Confederation that are annexed and made part of Prussia. Here you see the areas, Schleswig and Holstein, that they fight it over Austria with. Then in the yellow, yay, you have, I'm sorry, I meant to do the orange. The orange are the areas that come in after the Austrian-Prussian War, and the yellow is what comes in after the war with France and Prussia. And here's the Alsace-Lorraine territory if you're looking at where that is. It's right here. So this whole thing is what becomes Germany. All the Germanic lands come together, they form a united Germany. All right, so what does the victory mean? Well, it unifies Germany. Representatives of all the different previous German states meet together in Versailles near Paris, neutral territory, and they decide that Kaiser Wilhelm I, yay, will be named Kaiser, aka Emperor of the German Empire. Wilhelm then appoints Bismarck the first chancellor of the German Empire. And all this really makes sense, right? They were the ones that were in charge of Prussia, and they were kind of behind everything. So it would be logical that they would go and rule over this united Germany now that Germany's united and they were the ones that orchestrated it. It seems kind of fair. The German victory changes the balance of power in Europe. Napoleon III is gone, and France's power really begins to decline. So France is on the decline, Germany on the upswing, and Germany becomes economically more powerful. They want to focus on creating an empire. Germany now wants to be, this united Germany wants to show their dominance in Europe. And that is part of what will lead to World War I. And that's why understanding the background of this is so important. Because when you get to a world event like World War I say world event, it's actually more of a European event, right? But anyway, it pulls in, we want to know what's causing it. These things don't happen out of nowhere. There are reasons that this stuff occurs. So that's why what we're learning here is important. So in the years after 1871, Germany just goes banging. They do awesome. Under the leadership of Wilhelm I and Bismarck, it develops into an empire, and this is known as the Second Reich. or Second Empire. The Germans considered the Holy Roman Empire the First Reich. So the First Reich is the Holy Roman Empire. The Second Reich is the period under Wilhelm I. When Hitler comes along, Hitler will claim to be starting the Third Reich, which he said would last 1,000 years, and that did not happen because Hitler's a horrible person. So the German separate states wanted to retain some power, and so Germany takes what we call a federalist form of government. The power is shared between state and national governments. That's what we have in the United States here. There is a national government, but the states in the United States, North Carolina, South Carolina, North Dakota, South Dakota, California, they have their own state governments. They're subservient to the national government. They're not as powerful as the national government, but we run things within our own state. We do us. They also begin developing political parties within the German Empire itself. Bismarck really felt that the Roman Catholic Church was a threat to government because he felt like the Roman Catholic Church brought in the power of the Pope and allowing the Pope to have too much say-so over what happens, and he doesn't want that to occur. He believes that government and not the church should control aspects of culture. You're looking at here a separation of church and state. Concept we hold here in the United States, something that we have. We don't have a state-run church. Church is not influencing the government directly, and so he really works to decrease the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. The struggle between church and state is known as Kulturkampf, which means struggle for culture. Economic growth, just very quickly. After unification, they had a time of economic growth. France had to pay reparations, which means they had to pay for any damage done to Germany during the Franco-German War. So they got money coming in there, the Franco-Prussian War, sorry. They had money coming in there. Those roads, the money was used to build lots of infrastructure, particularly railroads that were used to connect all the German states. Other funds are used to help German businesses. It's used to help them out in the Industrial Revolution, what's going on. They focus on coal mines, steel factories. Germany is really, really, really flourishing. Certainly internally, they are catching up with the rest of Europe and very, very, very quickly. There were some people that felt like the people that own the German factories had way too much control, and there was some call for state control of German industries. Doesn't necessarily happen. Bismarck didn't like the concept of socialism. He didn't like the idea of limiting private enterprise. He didn't like the idea of we're all sharing from the same piece of pie. Mostly because he thought socialists that had tried to assassinate Emperor Wilhelm in the head. And so he pushes through reforms that the socialists were claiming that they needed in a way to say, we don't need the socialists to take over. We don't need that political influence. Our government can do these things that you want. So he worked on benefits for health, accidents, old age, disability. He worked on the current German government providing those things. So after unification, Bismarck felt like Germany didn't really need to expand anymore, that they were kind of good the way they were. He saw France as a threat, but he didn't want to take over France. He doesn't want to go that far. However, he believes that alliances are important. And again, we're looking at another cause of World War I. He makes alliances with Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Russia. And their agreement is that when one of us is attacked, the rest of us will have your back. We'll come get you. This is a fundamental cause of World War I. Please do not forget it. Well, in 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm's son, Kaiser Wilhelm I, his son Wilhelm II, takes charge, and he fires Bismarck because they don't get along. And he's like, I'm ahead of you, Bismarck. You're gone. And wow, boy, will he is the Kaiser of Germany when World War I starts. He will work to strengthen those alliances, and he also works to build up the most powerful military in Europe. And there's no fun in having the most powerful military in Europe if you don't get to use it on someone. So we're going to stop there. looking at the unification and the ramifications of the unification of Germany. And we're going to talk about a couple of concepts or ideas floating around that you want to be aware of. Zionism. Zionism is the desire for the Jewish population to reestablish an independent homeland where their ancestors had lived in the Middle East, a place where they could be free of persecution that they get in pretty much everywhere that they've lived. Whether you've got the pogroms in Russia or ghettoed areas in other parts of Europe and flat out discrimination, the Jewish population, through the concept of Zionism started by Theodor Herzl, is this idea that we're never going to be okay everywhere else. We're always going to be discriminated against. We want our homeland back. We deserve it. We need it. We want to have an independent Jewish state. Now, yes, one exists today. It's called Israel, and that's based on the concept of the Zionist movement. There's one other thing you want to be aware of. It's called the Dreyfus Affair. And the Dreyfus Affair happens in 1894, and it happens in France. So Alfred Dreyfus had been the captain of the French army, and he was Jewish. And he was very falsely accused of committing espionage against France and giving military secrets to Germany. He essentially was picked and accused with no evidence whatsoever. They wanted to let him take the fall because he was Jewish. And that focuses on those people being anti-Semitic. If you're anti-Semitic, you don't like Jewish people. He was humiliated in a public ceremony. His uniform stripes were removed. His sword was broken. There is evidence that someone else, not him, a non-Jewish person, a non-Jewish officer, was the spy, but he wasn't charged. He was found not guilty, even though all the other evidence pointed to him. Dreyfus is not cleared of these charges until 1906, and it really moves forward the concept of the Zionist movement. The idea, it's kind of seen as an example of the extreme anti-Semitism that's going on in Europe, in Russia, and to some cases the United States, and the call for why Zionism needs to happen. So, where are we at? I have managed to finish this ed puzzle in less than 20 minutes, woot woot, and you need to make sure that you are familiar with this and that you have read all of chapter 21, and that ends our look at chapter 21. Please, if you have questions on ed puzzles, you need to make sure that you are asking them in class so that I can clarify anything you're not understanding.